Here we go. Okay. How you guys doing? Hope it's good to see everybody. And let's get started here. Okay, so I'm going to start with an interesting thing that's happening now, which I think is really transformative in America right now. It's like it's a little terrifying to watch. But I'll give you a little background first. About 15 years ago is when I started like this program, maybe 20 years ago, like bringing teenagers into like learning about the U.S.'s relationship and getting them politically involved and advocating for Israel on a political level. And what was fascinating about that time period was that the common thing that we would always say, whether it was me, it was AIPAC employees, like all our speakers would always say, is that Israel is the only bipartisan issue in Congress, meaning the Republicans and Democrats agree on. And they agree on like how to go about it, and they're all pro-Israel. And it's like it was so rare. I can't even remember anybody to have a member of Congress that wasn't pro-Israel, or to have Republicans and Democrats like arguing over Israel. It was just like Israel's the one thing that we're not going to argue about. We're just going to you have a bill. We'll have a Republican on the bill and a Democrat on the bill. It'll be bipartisan. We'll both sponsor it together. We'll get all the people from all the parties to sponsor it, and it'll be like no problem. And that's how like it always was. It was like this incredible thing, and that's changed, right? So that's definitely changed, unfortunately, and so now it's not bipartisan. You have both parties trying to show that they're either more pro-Israel or in reality trying to show how the other party isn't pro-Israel, and you have members of Congress that are not pro-Israel. Again, it never happened. It was like this thing where like nobody wasn't pro-Israel. It was like the craziest thing. It's only crazy because now we look at it and we're like, how could that be? Right now things aren't pro-Israel. So how could you have like that type of a thing? So that's the strange thing. So today you have members of Congress who are not pro-Israel, but they're not all like not pro-Israel. That's not what's happening. What you have is you have three categories of members of Congress that are not pro-Israel. Okay, and they're all three are very different. Okay, and it's important to note the distinction because it's very easy to paint everybody with the same brush, but they're really very different. So let's talk about first members of Congress who are anti-Semitic. Okay, and I fully believe. I know some people say they're not anti-Semitic. I fully believe these people are anti-Semitic. Okay, what I'm talking about are some of the progressive members of the Democratic Party. Okay, it's just some of them. It's not all the progressive members. It's clearly not all the members of the Democratic Party. 95% of the members of the Democratic Party are pro-Israel. Now, that doesn't mean that you as an individual, meaning you, might disagree with some of the things that Democratic members say, right? But Democratic members of Congress, for the most part, 95% are pro-Israel. Okay, they vote pro-Israel on everything. They are pro-Israel. They sponsor legislation that's pro-Israel, and they are pro-Israel. Now, let's say let's say you're not in favor of the two-state solution. Okay, let's say you think the two-state solution is bad. The entire Democratic Party is in favor of the two-state solution. So you're like, oh, they're not pro-Israel because they're for the two-state solution. No, that's ridiculous. They think that the two-state solution is better for Israel. Okay, so you might think it's not better for Israel. That doesn't make them anti-Israel. Anti-Israel means that they want something worse for Israel. Okay, you might say, well, so we got to stop their pro-Israel love. It's not so good, right? Okay, great. Joe Biden, President Biden, is pro-Israel. He calls himself a Zionist. Okay, like he is pro-Israel. Now, President Biden also doesn't want my town to build anything. Right? He doesn't want my town to build anything. So now I look at President Biden and I have serious disagreements with him. But I know President Biden loves Israel. I know that for a fact. He loves Israel. I disagree with certain aspects of his love, but I know he loves Israel. There are members of Congress who not only don't love Israel, but they hate Israel. And I believe that their hate of Israel stems from their hate of the Jewish people. Who am I talking about? Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. These are members of Congress who I believe, and it's my opinion, you could disagree with me, it's perfectly fine, that they are anti-Semitic. They are definitely anti-Israel. That nobody's going to disagree with. I mean, you're like, that's ridiculous to say that they're not anti-Israel, but I believe that their anti-Israel feeling stems from being anti-Semitic, okay? Then you have some of their friends right? By the way, they're not the only two. There's Cory Bush, there's Mark Buchanan. There are about 8 or 9 members of Congress who are virulently anti-Israel. Okay, they do not want what's best for Israel. They've just voted against the Iron Dome missile system. The Iron Dome missile system, all it does is stop Hamas rockets from hitting civilian areas. If you could explain to me, I'll give you the all night long, why you should be against terrorist rockets hitting civilians, and that's a legitimate position, I'll give you all the credit in the world. I don't think anyone can make a serious argument that doesn't start and end with anti-Semitism as to why Israeli civilians shouldn't be hit by terrorist rockets. It's crazy. That's ridiculous. There's no reason to say that a country shouldn't have the ability to defend itself against terrorist rockets. There's no legitimate reason you could say that. And I believe that the only reason why you say that is because you're anti-Semitic. That's the only thing that makes a bit of sense to me. Okay. Okay, so that's one category of members of Congress who I believe are anti-Israel because they're anti-Semitic. But I believe that they're for sure anti-Israel. Okay, so that's one category of members of Congress. Then you have another category. Okay, this category of anti-Israel member of Congress is populated by only one person. Okay, so it's right now, but 50, 60 years ago, there were a lot of people like this before there was an Israel. 70, 80 years ago, okay, World War II, there were a lot of people that held this position. This position is pure ignorant. This is the reason why there's only one member of Congress that feels this way, okay? His name is Thomas Massie. He's a Republican member of Congress, and the guy is just dumb. He's just dumb, okay? And again, yes, obviously it's my opinion. I've never given him an intelligence test, but I'm fully confident that if he took one, he would fail it incredible, like just really do poorly. Why? What's his position? His position is that America should give no foreign aid, none, to anyone across the board. Now, he's not anti-Israel, he's not anti-Semitic, he's not anti-Israel. He doesn't care about Israel. He doesn't care if you're Israel, if you're Mexico, if you're Canada, if you're Poland, if you're Jordan, if you're Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter. America should not be spending money outside of its borders. Okay, now that sounds like a very good position. It's a very good position for my family. My family should not be spending money outside of the country that we live in. That's a very good budget reason. Everything you can have is in the country. Don't spend money outside the country. That's a very good idea. It's a very good idea if you're like a 4th grader and you go to the 4th grader and say, America's in debt. Should it be spending money outside of the country? And every 4th grader will tell you, no, don't do that. Spend the money inside because Americans need that money, right? It sounds very good until you realize that, wait a minute, hold on a second. America wants to sell Fords in other countries. That means that those countries have to allow Fords to come in to be sold. In order to make nice with those countries, you want to give them stuff. So America's going to have $100 million to Poland, and Poland's going to let Fords in, and the Polish people are going to buy $2 billion worth of Fords. Those $2 billion worth of Fords that $2 billion is going to go to Detroit, and Detroit is going to spend that money on employees and American citizens who are now going to have jobs. And America is going to tax Ford at 20 to 30% of that $20 billion. So for the $100 million that America gives Poland, they're going to have about $300 million in tax revenues from Ford, okay? Now, even the 4th grader will understand why this is a good idea, okay? America is going to give Israel $3.1 billion or $3.8 billion now every year. But Israel has to spend that $3.8 billion in America on American weapons, which means that companies like Boeing are going to make a lot of money because Israel's going to be spending that money on Boeing, and America is going to tax it. And then Israel's going to improve the airplanes that Boeing makes so the American Air Force gets the new and improved version of Boeing. And Israel's going to be able to help America in numerous different ways. So all of a sudden, this makes sense now for America to invest $3.8 billion in Israel, okay? If America doesn't give Egypt $1.5 billion a year, that Egypt is going to go to war with Israel. Okay, might not happen tomorrow, but it'll happen at some point, in which case America is going to have to now spend money stopping Egypt from going to war and probably send American troops to Egypt, which will then cost America 80 billion, or like in the case of Afghanistan, $80 trillion. Okay, which then, so now we could spend $1.5 billion a year on Egypt, or $80 trillion on some war that's going to come up down the way, because that's how life works. Thomas Massie, for some reason, can't understand this. Either his staff are idiots and they're explaining this to him, or he doesn't have the intelligence to be able to explain this. Either way, when it comes time to vote for Iron Dome, Thomas Massie says, no, I don't care about what Iron Dome does. I don't care if it's a good idea. I don't care if it's a bad idea. The basic fact is that Iron Dome is going to be spent over in Israel. We're going to be giving money to Israel. Wait a minute, Congressman Massie. It's not actually how it works. We're not going to actually give Israel $1 billion. We're going to give Israel $1 billion of missiles that are made in America. And that's an American company we're going to be giving the money to. No, you're giving the money to Israel. No, Congressman, we're not giving the money to Israel. It doesn't go to Israel. Not 1 cent goes to Israel. It goes to Raytheon, which is an American company based in Boston. And they have manufacturers in America who are making those missiles. So the $1 billion is going to go to America. No, we're not going to vote for that because the $1 billion is going to Israel. Congressman, we're going to say this really slowly for you now. None of the money goes to Israel. It goes to America. Not going to vote for it because America shouldn't be spending money overseas. Okay, Congressman, you're an idiot. Okay, so, right, so the entire Republican Party tries explaining this to Thomas Massie. Then AIPAC, an American organization, takes out an ad that says, hey, Thomas Massie, you're an idiot. You don't, they didn't write that, but they should have. They said, Thomas Massie, you voted against Iron Dome just like Ilhan Omar. And then Thomas Massie says, see, that's foreign interference in our own political system. No, that was an American organization that took out an ad. Congressman Massie, you seem to not understand some basic things about politics. The A in AIPAC doesn't stand for Israel. It stands for America because it's an American organization. Doesn't take money from Israel. Israel doesn't direct it to do anything. It's an American organization. In fact, Congressman Massie, all of your Republican friends hang out at AIPAC. They come to its conference because it's an American organization. You see the colors in AIPAC? It's red, white, and blue. Look at your desk. You have the same flag on your desk. Congressman Massie, you got to figure this out at some point. So far he hasn't, okay? But that's the second category. Now, Congressman Massie and Ilhan Omar don't agree on anything, okay? Well, they do agree that that America shouldn't be spending money on Iron Dome. But the reasons why they both agree to that are very, very different. Everybody got it? Okay, okay, good. Okay, now let's talk about the third category. The third category is a big jerk named Rand Paul, okay? Rand Paul is a senator from Kentucky. Now, Rand Paul, we've also tried explaining things to. Rand Paul used to believe, like Thomas Massie, we shouldn't spend any money outside, but Rand Paul is actually very intelligent. He was an eye doctor before he became a senator. So he actually has a brain, he understands something, okay? So when first he went into the Senate and he said, we shouldn't be spending any money outside of America, so we're not gonna give any money to Israel. And then they said, wait a minute, Senator Paul, let's talk this through. And they gave the same speech that we just gave to Massie, and he agreed and said, okay, so Rand Paul generally agrees and votes for everything that Israel needs. He's pro-Israel, okay? Good. But here's the story. Rand Paul hates President Biden. He hates President Biden. He also hates Afghanistan. And he thinks that Afghanistan, America's involvement in Afghanistan was a huge mistake. Not such a crazy opinion when you think about the fact that 20 years ago, we went into Afghanistan to stop the Taliban from ruling Afghanistan. 20 years later, we pulled out of Afghanistan, and 1 week later, the Taliban took over again. Okay, doesn't look like the most successful project in the United States of America. So $80 trillion down the drain, 20 years, thousands of dead soldiers, tens of thousands of injured soldiers, and in the end of the day, Taliban's still in control. Okay, they took a 20-year break, and now they have about $6 trillion worth of American equipment that they're running around with, including airplanes and helicopters, because it's way too expensive for America to bring that stuff home. The shipping costs are crazy. Even if you have Amazon Prime, to take a Black Hawk helicopter home from Afghanistan is way too expensive. So we just left it there. And now the Taliban are flying American Black Hawk helicopters. Anyway, so Rand Paul looks at this and says, this was a big mistake. President Biden says, okay, we left Afghanistan. And now the problem is in Afghanistan is that there are people starving to death because the Taliban don't know how to run a country. So now none of their people have food. So America really went in, broke the country, and now that people are starving. So President Biden says that's not right on America's part. We should give Afghanistan $6 billion of worth of food. That's what we should really do. So Rand Paul says, you're like, President Biden, you're nuts. Like, do you understand what you're doing now? Like, you just pulled all the soldiers out, and now you want to drop $6 billion worth of food in the country run by Muslim extremists who want to kill women that want to just go to school. Okay, this is not a good idea. You can't do this. So Rand Paul really wants to stop this. The problem is that no one's going to stop this. The money's going to go through because there's a Democratic majority in the Senate. There's a Democratic majority in the House, and Joe Biden wants it done. So all the Democrats are going to vote for this $6 billion. So how can Rand Paul stop this from happening? Well, here's the rule in the Senate. Okay, the rule of the Senate is that one senator can put a block on legislation. That's the rule. He can just put a block. So Rand Paul says, wait a minute, what do people really want besides Afghanistan? They want $1 billion worth of missiles to go for the Iron Dome system. That's what they really, really want. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'll put a block on the money to Israel, and until they agree not to send the money to Afghanistan. So Rand Paul does this. He puts a block on the money to Israel for Iron Dome. Now, we need Iron Dome. Okay, this is a big thing. People will die if we don't have Iron Dome. So we need the Iron Dome missiles. So we go to Rand Paul. We say, listen, Senator Paul, we get what you're trying to do. You're playing politics. You're trying to make sure that Joe Biden doesn't get his way. And you're trying to make sure we don't waste any more money in Afghanistan. We get that. But here's the problem. The way you're doing this is going to put Israeli lives at risk. We can't do that. So Rand Paul's answer is this. I don't want to put like Israeli lives at risk. All you got to do is tell President Biden to not send the money to Afghanistan, and then no Israeli lives will be at risk. So I said, but Rand Paul, that's not really fair because like we're AIPAC, we work on a U.S.-Israel relationship that should be strong. We don't really have anything to do with Afghanistan. Well, guess what, guys? Now you're going to be in the Afghanistan business because if you want your money for the Iron Dome, you've got to get the Afghanistan business. Now, Rand Paul's not anti-Semitic. He's not anti-Israel. He's just being a jerk. Okay, that's all he's doing. He's just being a big jerk. So what we're trying to explain to Rand Paul is don't be a jerk. Now, the thing is, all the guys that usually are good at convincing Rand Paul to do stuff he doesn't want to do, meaning the people that donate money to his campaign, have gone to him and had the conversation with him and said, don't be a jerk. And he said, guys, you don't get it. This time I'm not giving in. So now we've got a block on the Iron Dome bill in the Senate, and we can't get that block on because Rand Paul is being a big jerk. Okay, so to sum up, and then I'm going to take Rebecca's question. Okay, to sum up, we've got a big problem here. We've got a number of members of Congress who are not being pro-Israel. Okay, they're being anti-Israel, but for three different reasons. Okay, you've got your squad people who are being anti-Israel because I believe they're anti-Semitic, but they're definitely anti-Israel. Okay, then you've got Tom Massie, who's just an idiot. Okay, who can't understand basic math. And then you've got, and can't think past like tomorrow. And then you've got Rand Paul. Rand Paul is just being a big jerk, okay? So those are your three categories. In the end of the day, all three of them are going to try to stop Israel from getting Iron Dome. The squad failed, Tom Massie failed, but Rand Paul succeeding in stopping it. So that's the story. Okay, Rebecca?
Okay, I don't fully understand like how the whole system works. I mean, I'm just not getting it. But why couldn't he just put a block directly on the Afghanistan bill?
It's a good question. So the thing is, the Afghanistan, will get, it's a good question. It will get outvoted. It'll be voted out. Okay. So that's gonna be the problem with the Afghanistan thing. Eventually we can outvote Rand Paul on the Israel thing also, but it's a big procedure and it's a lot of trouble to do it. Okay. Good. That's our first thing. Okay. Shlomi, go ahead.
Which of the three do you think is the most dangerous to the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Well, right now, none of them are really dangerous. But the problem is that it only becomes dangerous to Israel. Because right now, look, the Iron Dome bill went 420 to 9 in the House. And as soon as Rand Paul gets his way, the vote will go 100 to 0 in the Senate. So America is like crazy pro-Israel. Okay, that's like, those are insane numbers. The problem is that when you have a minority lead, like, no, I shouldn't say minority lead, when you have such a close lead in Congress, meaning the Democrats have the majority in Congress, but it's only by like, I think it might be 10, 12 seats. So when you have the majority that thin, okay, and Republicans want to stop any legislation from being passed by Democrats, then the squad becomes very powerful, even though they're very few numbers. Okay, you guys understand, right? So so it's not so much that it's dangerous. So the squad's not going to take over the Senate or Congress, and America will never vote somebody from the squad in as president. It's just not going to happen because you need to win over some Republican voters. So somebody like President Biden, when he goes up against President Trump, he can win over Republican voters because some Republicans are sick and tired of President Trump. So that could work, okay? You're never going to have those guys vote for Bernie Sanders. They would, as much as they hate Donald Trump, they still want to have, President Trump over Bernie Sanders. You could tolerate a President Biden. You cannot tolerate, if you're a Republican, a President Sanders who starts talking about socialism as if it's not something that's failed every single place in the world. Okay, so that's the issue. So none of them are a real threat. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on that part of our meeting? Okay, let's talk about Iran. Okay. Now, Iran, very bad place, very bad people. Not the people, sorry, the leaders are bad. The Iranians themselves are great, and they're like pro-Israel. They're like very normal Iranian people. The leadership are people that are crazy. They're insane. Okay, they're completely irrational. They're nuts. Okay, and Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the map. The good thing is, strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship is that they also want to wipe America off the face of the map. So, like, it's another point where America and Israel gets together and like, okay, a little small history because we're not going to get into it. President Obama signed a deal with Iran. Iran broke the deal. Then America broke the deal because they literally broke the deal. They broke out of the deal. President Trump canceled out of the deal. And then President Trump had this idea that if you put like 5 or 6 years of sanctions onto the Iranians, then the Iranians would break, their backs would break, and they would come and beg America whatever they could do to get their money back. Okay, that was the President Trump plan. The problem with President Trump's plan is that America didn't vote for President Trump. So now he's out. Okay, so the plan failed because President Trump's not there. President Biden wants to go back and make a deal with Iran like President Obama did. The problem that President Biden is having in signing a deal with the Iranians is that Iran doesn't really want a deal because they're not really suffering so much without a deal. So that's the problem. You can't make a deal with someone that doesn't want to make a deal. So we're kind of stuck here. Okay, the Europeans who do a lot of business with Iran desperately want a deal. Okay, desperately want a deal. So this is the issue. So Yair Lapid, Israel's foreign minister and prime minister designate, whatever, he's going to be in the power sharing thing. He becomes the next prime minister. So he flew to America last week, and America's trying to have one last go at a deal with Iran. They really want to make it one last try to make a deal with Iran. That doesn't seem like it's working. Like, it really doesn't seem like it's working because Iran really doesn't want a deal. So the question is, what do we do now? What do we do if there's no deal? Let's say Iran doesn't want to deal. What do we do? Right? What's the option? Now, and Iran is going further and further towards a nuclear weapon. So what do we do? How do we stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon if they won't make a deal diplomatically? Right? This becomes the problem. Rebecca, what do you think?
You probably have to do some sort of like attack or something.
Right. So so we'd have to go militarily. Now here's the problem. President Biden really doesn't want to do that. He just got a lot of flack for pulling soldiers out of Afghanistan. The last thing he wants to do is now put more soldiers into Iran, right? This isn't like a little bombing raid that we're going to be doing. This is like a country changing. We're going to have to do it to Iran, okay? We're probably, excuse me for being so tired, we're probably going to have to wipe out Iran's leadership and have the regime change. This is not something President Biden wants to do. This is exactly the opposite of everything President Biden wants to do, is not attack Iran. Israel doesn't want to attack Iran either, okay? Because that will cause Hezbollah and Hamas to attack Israel. You're talking about there's going to be probably a good 10,000 Israelis dead, if not more, if it doesn't get even bigger. And you could be talking about a couple 100,000 Israelis dead if the war gets really bad, okay? Nobody wants that. So what do? This is the problem, okay? George, did you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it would be difficult for Biden to like follow through with Trump's plan and put in place sanctions, but I feel like that might work in this situation, even though that would be a really bad look for Biden to use Trump's plan.
Right, it'd probably be the very worst thing, because also keep in mind that just in case anybody didn't understand what President Biden would be doing, President Trump would be in front of a microphone every minute of every day talking about how President Biden's plan failed and ha ha ha. Now, if he has to go to war, the same thing's going to happen. President Trump's going to be like, see, my plan, you didn't have to go to war. I was the only president not to bring America into war, right? Which is a pretty crazy thing, right? So either way, he loses. The only way he wins and shows that his plan works, right, is if you could somehow diplomatically make Iran come to the table and have a deal, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, so that's the problem. So Israeli officials keep talking about how they're examining other options right now. And how does Iran not get a nuclear weapon until this point? How's that happened? Like, just so you understand, you could probably acquire a nuclear weapon if you really put your mind to it. Okay. Like it's really not that hard. First of all, there are nuclear weapons all around the world that are like, that Russia has and everything, that like you could probably walk away with one of them. So that's number one, right? There are scientists from Pakistan who can sell you the know-how to make a weapon. You can read on the internet how to make a nuclear weapon. You can Google it. It's really not that difficult. So how is it after 25 years of trying to build a nuclear weapon, Iran has so miserably failed? These are very smart people. They created chess, right? These are like really, like, Iranians are not stupid. This is not a country full of Thomas Massies, right? These are really intelligent people. So how does anybody explain? How do you explain how they don't have a nuclear weapon? Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, accidents keep happening.
Yeah,
it's
crazy.
Like things keep happening to nuclear scientists.
Right. We shouldn't make light of suicide, and I normally don't, but nuclear scientists in Iran have shot themselves 5 times in the head over and over. It's crazy, right? Like it's a real horrible malady. They have some serious mental health issues in the Iranian nuclear scientist community, where they don't just shoot themselves once in the head, which is generally enough for people to commit suicide. They shoot themselves 5 times in the head to make sure that it works. This is obviously being facetious if anybody doesn't get it. And I don't like joking about suicide, but there's really no way of explaining this otherwise. Israeli Mossad agents will have Iranian scientists shot 5 times in the head, and then just for kicks, put the gun in the Iranian scientist's hand and put it by his head, as if you can shoot yourself 5 times in the head. You can't shoot yourself 5 times in the head. The first bullet kills you. You cannot shoot yourself 5 times. Okay, so that's it. Scientists will also be driving down the street, and all of a sudden, masked men driving on motorcycles will go by and attach explosives to their car windows and blow their heads away. It's crazy. Another scientist was the head of the scientist program 2 months ago, was driving on the highway, and there was a gun remotely controlled from somewhere else that shot him to death. Now here, by the way, just so you understand how stupid the scientist was, okay? The car was shot at and it didn't hit him right away, okay? But there were clear bullet holes in his windshield, okay? Now, I all of us have seen enough movies to know that if we're driving and all of a sudden our car gets hit by bullets and there's holes in my windshield, you don't get out of the car. You drive away. The scientists got out of the car and then they were able to hit him. It's just like, you just sometimes have to scratch your head, okay? Planes bringing nuclear materials to Iran have somehow gone down over the Indian Ocean. Crazy coincidences, right? Things like that happening. Okay, so yeah, viruses, computer viruses have hit Iranian nuclear plants. It's a string of 25 years of bad luck, which we don't wish on our worst enemies. Actually, we have wished on our worst enemies and we've caused it on our worst enemy. And they're called Iran and it's their nuclear program. And that's why it's called sabotage. And we've been doing it. We've been stopping it. I'm sorry for being so sarcastic but sometimes I have to, especially when I'm the only one talking. Chaya, I don't know who you are, but I'm so happy that you're in this meeting and you have a question. What would you like to ask?
Who is actually killing? They're just random people.
Well, I'm sorry. Can you ask the question again?
You said that there were like bombs put on the scientists, or like someone shot the scientists. Like, who are these people shooting them?
These are either Mossad agents or CIA agents, and chances are it's Israeli Mossad agents. But Israel never takes credit for operations that it does. So let me say it in a non-sarcastic way without trying to be humorous when most of the time it fails. Israel has caused sabotage to Iranian's nuclear program by blowing people up, killing the scientists, causing viruses and explosions to happen inside nuclear plants. So it's stuff that is technically an act of war, but not something that Iran's going to go to war with, because then they have to admit that Israel was able to get into their top secret facilities. Okay, so they're not going to admit it, but they have been doing it. Okay, so that's what's happening. Okay, so that's why, to answer the question how Iran has not developed a nuclear weapon, that's how they've never been able to develop a nuclear weapon, even though it's fairly simple to be able to do so. Okay, got it? That's the story. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this? No. So the question is, let me just say one more thing. The question is, what's going to happen going forward, right? How are we going forward? You can't really rely on this sabotage working. At some point, something has to give, because Iran is now moving faster and faster towards a nuclear weapon. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. So now the question is, will there be an attack? If there's an attack, that's going to be a pretty scary thing. Okay. Okay. No questions on this anymore? That's it. We're good. Okay. Last thing. Something that's happening in Israel, which is I find very disturbing. First thing is, there's been a lot of violence between Israelis. I don't know who they are. The news calls them Israeli settlers. It's been happening in Yehuda v'Shomron, Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, where you have Israeli settlers live, and they've been attacking Palestinians at an alarmingly high rate. This is something that we never used to do. Okay, if it was self-defense, that's one thing, but it seems that there are a group of troublemakers, a lot of troublemakers, who are either coming to settlements and causing trouble. They're usually not from the research that I've been able to do and find out is that generally when they have a settlement next to a Palestinian village, and then the Palestinians are attacked, right? So it's generally not people from that settlement that end up getting arrested. It's generally people that came into the settlement to start trouble. And it's been happening at a higher and higher rate, where Palestinians are getting attacked by Israelis. Now, a lot of these stories are made up, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are true. And that's a troubling thing. The other thing that's troubling that we're seeing is a lot of Arab on Arab violence. So that Israeli citizens who are Arabs killing other Arabs. In fact, the Times of Israel is keeping a count of how many times. It's been 100 this year. And so you have to keep in mind, by the way, in America, like, you hear about murders all the time, and it's like it doesn't even make the news, a lot of murders. Okay. Like in Chicago, they have about 40 murders every weekend. That's crazy, right? It only makes the news if it gets up to like, oh, a crazy weekend in Chicago, 100 people were murdered. That's nuts. That's just crazy. It means that there are 40 people that went out that weekend and murdered people. It's horrible. Israel doesn't have that, right? Israel has terrorism, okay, but that's a very specific type of violence. We don't generally have murders, okay? And when we have a murder, it like makes the news for the whole week if there's a murder. It's usually like a husband killing a wife or something of that nature, okay? It's not, but now Arabs are becoming more and more violent towards each other. And this is Israel's responsibility to stop. So this violence that's increasing around Israel is becoming more and more of a news story, and it's becoming more and more of a concern, okay? So that's something that that we're noticing a lot of, okay? Israel has the first Arab party that's part of the government coalition that's making decisions, and a big reason why they broke off from the normative way of Arab voting, which is not to participate in Israeli voting, was to stop the violence, was to get more funds to stop Arab on Arab violence. Okay, it's becoming a huge issue. It's very dangerous. And it's Israeli citizens, right? So there's no difference if they're an Arab, citizen or an Israeli citizen. We can't have people killing each other, right? Murder is a bad thing. So these are two issues. I don't have anything really. I just want to make sure you're aware of it, that these things are happening. Okay, we got about 8 minutes left. Let's hear your questions on any topic. What we discussed, we didn't discuss. Jordan, go ahead.
So I think like what I've read is some of the hesitancy of like the Israeli government to intervene on this like Arab-Israeli violence is like if you have these like mostly Jewish policemen and women like trying to intervene, this could like lead to more violence between like law enforcement and
Well, no,
Arab
so
immigrants.
no. There are a lot of Arab policemen and women. It's not a police force of Israelis. There 20% of the country are Arab, and a lot of Arabs. It's a very good job for Arabs to have, to be policemen. So when you go around like Israel, you'll see tons of Arab policemen. So I don't think that that's really accurate to say.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's not an issue. So if they have like a unit of like police people, I guess, that are like both Arab Israeli and like Jewish Israeli.
Yeah, they're not
trying to
separate. They
intervene.
serve together.
Right.
It's like black officers and white officers in America. They serve together. You don't have like black units and white units, you have units of police officers.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, I don't think I can see why people would think that, but I don't think that's really the issue. Okay. Shlomi.
All right. Rabbi, frankly, I don't agree with so you don't think it's a major problem between the progressive party, the progressive wing of the Democrat Party, and their effects on public discourse. I've observed pretty plainly that their politics has had major effects on many of the people I would consider friends or like acquaintances from school. Like before, it was not in the vogue at all to be anti-Israel. Now it's definitely the popular decision to many people in my age. I believe that in the coming years, it's going to be a much larger position and could even be a major presidential candidate.
So I'll tell you, I understand what you're saying. And I definitely think that like a lot of young people are influenced by AOC and the like. And I could be wrong. I'm not a political expert of what goes on, but I'll tell you why I don't think it's true. I think that a lot of young people, and there are like surveys that prove this and polls that prove this. As they get older, they lose this fascination with socialism and with what the Progressive Party is pushing. So I'll give you a stat to show it to explain. You know how people always talk about how like the young people in college are more anti-Israel and they're anti-Israel on campus, and when those people get older, it's going to become a problem. You guys have heard this, right? And Shlomi's talking about okay. In the 1990s, when I was in high school, people were saying the exact same thing. Okay, college campuses are anti-Israel. Now, those people in the 1990s who are on college campuses, they're my age. So they're in their 40s and 50s now. Okay. So you would expect those people, they were anti-Israel in college, just like they're just like the 20-year-olds are anti-Israel in college today. So now you would expect that the majority of Americans today would be anti-Israel because those people grew up anti-Israel, right? And they're now their 40 and 50-year-olds. But here's the crazy thing. If you look at 1990 and you look at today, okay, and you look at the stats of how many people in their 40s and 50s were pro-Israel in 1990, okay? There was just like surveys that came out about this, okay? So, and then you look today, the numbers are exactly the same of 40 to 50-year-olds. And that doesn't make any sense because when they were 20, they were anti-Israel. So as the years went on, those 20-year-olds should be now anti-Israel 40 and 50-year-olds, right? That's how it should work. But in the 1990s, 40 and 50-year-olds were at 75% pro-Israel. In 2021, 40 to 40, there's 75% of 40 to 50-year-olds are pro-Israel. So how did that happen, right? So the only way you can explain, and by the way, the same percentages anti-Israel on college campuses was true in 1990s and it's true today. Okay, so the only number, right? So none of the numbers have shifted, but it doesn't make any sense. The only way that you can explain it is that as people get older, they become more pro-Israel. You see the same thing by as people get older, they become more conservative. Okay, it's just a way of things. Now, I'm not saying that conservative are more pro-Israel and that those two are aligned. I'm just saying that you see that phenomena has always happened in America, right? In the 1960s, it was like people were burning things down for Vietnam, right? Those people in 1980s were the same people, right, voting that America should go into other places to go to war, right? Nicaragua and Panama and places like that. So wait a minute, hold on a second. These were the same 20-year-olds protesting against this thing when they were in college. And then all of a sudden they get 20 years older and now they're on the opposite extreme. Yeah, people's opinions change. So Shlomi, I have optimism that the squad are a passing fad for 20-year-olds. I think that 20-year-olds will always be more anti-Israel. But as they get older, they start to realize like, hey, hold on a second, that's not a good opinion. Now I could be wrong, right? At some point things could shift, but I really don't believe that I am. I really believe that things are not going to be that bad. Rebecca?
Do you think if like the Israeli attacks on Arab citizens like continue that, well, I don't know if this already exists, but like, is there security for Israelis to go into Arab villages or Palestinian villages?
Okay, so I just want to clarify your question here. When Israelis are attacking Palestinians, right? They're not attacking Arab citizens. They're attacking Israelis attacking Palestinians. Okay, good. Now what's the question?
Like, is it that they're going into their villages or that like on the streets they're doing it?
No, so it's either going into their villages or into their fields, like their farms.
So how do they get in? Like, is there not security or something?
There's generally no security. The Palestinians have never needed security because they've never been attacked by Israelis, so they never needed security. So like my where I live is like there's crazy security because we've got to make sure terrorists don't come in. The Arabs that live near me don't have fences and they don't have, they have nothing because they don't have to worry. They have to worry about theft. They don't have to worry about like violence. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so that's our meeting for today. Hope to see you guys next week. Thanks for joining and see you guys next week. All the best, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye.